a new presidential administration is putting together its plan to lead our nation. But community groups are also making plans. What plans? Find out on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. The election of Donald Trump as the 45th President of the United States is being met with glee by many in this nation and with dismay by many others. Some are welcoming the implementation of some of the promises Trump made on the campaign trail, while others are developing strategies, techniques, and new tools to cope with the implementation of some of those campaign promises. On this show, I will talk with two guests who will share what several legal groups are doing to prepare for our new presidential administration. In the studio with me now is Jennifer Horn. Jenny, as she likes to be called, is an attorney at the Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County, an office that provides free civil legal services to low-income residents in San Mateo County. She has worked as an attorney with the organization for 22 years, working primarily with teen parents and their families with a focus on helping teen parents protect themselves and their children from abuse and helping them find the resources to continue their education and obtain health care. Over the past 10 years, she has focused more on immigration issues. My second guest, who will be talking with us now in the show by phone, is Megan Salome, immigration attorney for the Lawyer Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area. In her work, Megan focuses primarily on issues related to immigration, justice, representing clients in deportation proceedings, and pursuing litigation that would lead to widespread reforms in the immigration system. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you, Megan, for joining me on the show. When we talk about the new administration and making plans, let's talk about some of the concerns. What are some of the concerns legal organizations?
Well, I think one of the big concerns is the effect of fear, right? There's a great deal of fear in the community about the promises that Donald Trump made during his campaign, and that fear can deter people from doing things that we want them to do, like seek out health care, call the police when there's a domestic violence incident, call the police when there's a drug deal down the street. The fear of deportation enforcement has made the community afraid to apply for Medi-Cal, afraid to go to public health clinics, and that's something that's terrible for all of us. I think a second issue would be DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which is a program that President Obama initiated in 2012 and has helped 700,000 children and youth become legal in this country temporarily, be able to work and continue their educations. And they are some of the most productive members our society has.
Okay, now, you've thrown out a lot. And
there you
since
go.
Jenny's with us, I'd like to also get her response to the type of concerns that some people have who have received Trump's election with some dismay. So, Megan, are you with us?
Yeah, I think Jenny raises a really great point about the detrimental impact that Trump has had already on the community through fear-mongering and inciting a lot of anger that has already had a harmful impact on the community. And I think in addition to that, we're also very concerned about how his actions as president, especially in the immigration realm, are going to affect the communities immigrant communities, especially because for immigration specifically, the executive branch has so much power over whether or not individuals get a chance to have a fair hearing, and what might happen to them.
So you talked about his impact already. We mentioned fear. What type of impact? Could you be more specific in terms of the impact and why it's perceived as negative?
Well, I was just talking about, Jenny was mentioning how fear has affected people's desire to not call the police or to not sign up for health care or send their kids to school. That has already had a negative impact. That's what I was.
Sure. So when you talk about a negative impact already, in various areas, and the fear involved in it, let's talk about what might be a priority.
I think it's a priority to reassure people that the Army is not going to come to their door all of a sudden on January 20th. There were people Jackie Spear did a outreach event shortly after the election in East Palo Alto, and there were people who had literally mailed all their belongings to Mexico because they literally felt that the Army was going to come and take them from their homes.
So how do we know there won't be an army coming?
Well, I think that's about money, right? It costs money to do immigration enforcement. There has to be people hired. There has to be a budget. There already is an enormous budget in deportation, immigration enforcement, and they're already prioritizing the people that Trump said is a priority, which is people who have criminal backgrounds. For them to massively step up the enforcement, they're going to have to massively increase the amount of money allocated to the ICE, and that will take time. So he doesn't have the resources to suddenly send the Army.
So Megan, at any time, do jump in.
Yes.
We can't see you.
Did you want to comment on that?
I think that's true. And in order, President Obama has already done a record number of deportations, and deportation hearings are set out for years in advance. It seems hard to imagine under the current system how President Trump would be able to deport more people. However, there are other options that President Obama may not be using, such as summary or expedited procedures where the individual doesn't get the opportunity to hear a judge, to get a hearing before a judge, or trying to revitalize the Secure Communities program to increase cooperation with local and state law enforcement as another means of identifying people.
Sure. There is safe communities. Many cities still have that in place. It's called safe communities, secure communities.
Secure communities. Was it?
Where they promise not to report people to immigration authorities. For example, if there is a report of domestic violence, for instance.
There are a couple different programs, and the names of them make it confusing, because there was a program called
Sanctuary Cities.
Sanctuary
That's
Cities
what I was
I think
thinking of.
Secure Communities was a program that was actually an ICE enforcement program where the local jails would report to ICE if they encountered someone who didn't have papers in the jails. And that was, although might seem like a good idea in the sense that it's people who've come to jail, a lot of times people come to jail on very minor things like driving without a license, or they're arrested because the police aren't sure who the perpetrator was of the domestic violence and who was the victim.
No, some people would say driving without a license isn't minor.
I'm not a proponent of driving without a license, but I'm not sure that a father of 3 who's been in the country for 20 years should end up in ICE custody because he was driving without a license, right? I mean, I think there's a appropriate lack of enforcement sometimes that should happen in those kinds of situations.
Sure. Comments, Megan?
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that, Jenny. I don't think I have anything additional to add about that, except that the Secure Communities program was discontinued in 2014.
Right.
Sure, I meant sanctuary cities.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Now,
It
what
is
about that
confusing,
wall?
and it's confusing, people don't even agree on what a sanctuary city is.
Aha, so let's
Right.
talk about it. How would you define a sanctuary city? And I know those who hear it are, some of them are up in arms that San Francisco and maybe a city like East Palo Alto would consider themselves as a sanctuary city. So since you say that some people aren't sure what that is, let's talk about what's encompassed in a sanctuary city.
I'm going to turn that one to you, Megan, if that's okay.
Well, I think as a broad term, it basically means a city that has a policy of protecting undocumented immigrants by not prosecuting them solely for violating immigration laws. And it can also be refusing to share certain information related to immigration status with the federal government.
So how do you justify that? I mean, if people aren't here legally, how do you justify cities being sanctuary cities in terms of protecting them?
I think that when you talk about people being here legally or people being here not legally, you're oversimplifying what with the state that people are in. Sometimes people are here temporarily, but they're allowed to be here. Sometimes people are in the process of getting their papers. Sometimes people are haven't yet applied, but they have, a valid reason to flee persecution or flee horrible conditions in their country, and they're looking into that. And the federal government is the one that's supposed to be sorting that out, and having the police officers who don't have the ability to understand all the different levels of it be involved in that leads to people being afraid to come to the police for the things that the police are responsible for. And so we don't want the local authorities to be doing the federal government's job. The federal government has priorities for who they want to enforce immigration laws on and who they don't, and they set that according to the priorities, and the police are not in that same position.
Sure, you want to add to that, Megan?
No, I think when you have a city that has a large immigrant population, and you have a lot of people who are afraid that anyone interacting with anyone in the local government is going to end up having to be turned over by ICE, it makes it very hard for the government to operate, in a normal way. So I think that in many ways, having these policies can really benefit the city and all of the residents who live there.
Yes.
So a big concern is DACA for those students who registered under it, a program that would at least allow them to get jobs, continue with their education. And the feeling is that their names, telephone numbers, addresses, that they've already been identified. So is there some concern if some of these deportation ideas are in fact implemented? Is there justified fears that some of these students who are already identified might be in danger of being deported?
I think it's unprecedented for immigration to use people who applied for programs that they were eligible for to deport people. They've always deported people who applied for things and were denied. But this would be using people who came forward voluntarily and followed the rules of the program to then turn around and deport them. And that's such a bait and switch and such a horrific thing to do. And by definition, these are the people who are the lowest priority for enforcement. They came here as children. They don't have a criminal history or a serious criminal history. They went to school. They've been here for many years. They followed the rules, right? So I think that when even Donald Trump studying this issue, and he's backed off some from what he said during the campaign already, that he's going to see that that's not something that he wants to use for deportation enforcement, the information that people have given.
So Megan, since you will not be, may not be able to continue with us through the length of this show, I had mentioned that you are that you have been pursuing systematic immigration reform policies that would lead to that. Could you give us some idea of what that might encompass?
Well, I guess I feel like our plan, and many other organizations' plan in terms of how to resist new policies under Trump mirrors what we've done in the past, what many immigration advocacy groups have done in the past. I mean, DACA, talking about ending DACA wouldn't have existed if it weren't for community organizing and actions by ordinary people who advocated for that program and who organized, and immigrants who shared the stories with the press to change their narrative. And I think similarly, sanctuary cities and ending the government's quote-unquote secure communities program was also done through community organizing, people who advocated for their cities and for their states to change their policies, to pass legislation. All of those things we got through organizing and collective action, and I think we can use those same networks and tools to fight back against losing the ground that people have gained in recent years. Those weren't things that President Obama did on his own initiative, but they were things that people fought for and they won, and I think that they can defend them. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is education. There's a lot of organizations who are coming up with toolkits and websites and other training to provide Know Your Rights and make sure people know that if ICE does come knocking at your door, you don't have to answer, and what to do in those situations so that they can be empowered and to reduce the fear that can be so debilitating.
Sure.
And in terms of the legal side, we have one thing that's been really inspiring is we have just a huge amount of interest from private attorneys that we work with who want to help, who have been volunteering in record numbers to represent people in deportation cases, and people, even if they're not attorneys, who have second language capacity volunteering to be interpreters. So that's really uplifting to know that people are coming out and trying to get involved.
Okay, let me just stop you there to
Sure.
give Jenny a chance to
Uh-huh.
respond. If there are some things that you would like to touch upon that
Well,
Megan said.
I agree with Megan. I think that some of the kids that came forward to advocate for DACA, and they were actually advocating for what was called the DREAM Act, which would have been more encompassing than what DACA is. Those are some of the most courageous and admirable folks you've seen anywhere. I mean, they're coming forward and saying, I'm undocumented, and putting a human face on what has been described in, almost dehumanizing terms, aliens. One of the DACA kids that came and talked said that she heard about aliens, illegal aliens all growing up, and she thought they were, green people or something. And then one day she talked to her mother and she said, that's us. And she said, what? I'm not an alien, right? So I think those kids have helped so much in coming forward, and they made a huge difference. And I really hope that we continue to do that and can help them continue to do that, even in the face of this new administration.
So as we talk about some changes that might be afoot and some strategies that might be afoot, are there some strategies and tools, Megan, that you didn't discuss before that you might want to share?
Well, I think that the Lawyers Committee was created to utilize and leverage the tools from the private bar to enforce the civil rights laws, and that's something that's sort of our model that has continued throughout the years. And I think it's a very powerful tool to create rapid response systems with private attorneys who are trained and willing to help with mass defense or mass complaints of civil rights abuses as they happen.
Sure. Mapping civil rights abuses. What might that involve?
I think it's really important to have the community aware that there are people out there to help them, and there are people out there who are aiming to scam them. And I think it's very important that we have enough people like the Committee for Civil Rights, CLESPA, International Institute, Legal Aid,
And CLESPA is the
Community Legal Services of
Services
East
of
Palo Alto. There's also a website and an organization called Immigrant Legal Resource Center, which has very good materials for folks to read. And even actually the immigration website also has information that's pretty readable for people. There are a lot of people out there that are taking advantage of the fear by telling people, well, pay me $1,000 and I'll get you papers and protect you from this thing. You got to do it right now. Don't talk to anyone else. And you know, people are being scammed. And so one of the huge things that we need to do as in the media and as lawyers is give people the tools to figure out not to do that, right?
So what would that involve? If someone is approached by someone who says, "Give me $1,000 and I can do this for you," how do you? And I should say, I heard recently even people in Chinatown of Chinese ancestry now during the Chinese New Year's are being scammed out of their
Right.
money. So how does one know who's legitimate and who isn't?
Well, first of all, you shouldn't get immigration help from anybody who isn't an attorney or a Board of Immigration accredited representative. And you can go on the State Bar website and see if the person is an attorney, and you can see if the person has a record of discipline and whether they're licensed to practice.
And do you think, if somebody is very computer literate, that's what they can do if they have access to the internet,
Absolutely.
but a lot of people might not.
That's true. The internet's getting more and more accessible, and you can go to the library, right? And this is just looking on the internet, California State Bar or whatever state bar. Immigration actually has a fraud section on their website also. You can also call around and find out about the person that way. Ask before you sign anything or before you pay anything. You know, say you're going to come back the next day and investigate. You can also go to one of the community services agencies that I was mentioning before and find out about whether what the person's telling you is true, right? You know, I got told that because I have a sick kid, I can get my papers. Is that true? Answer no, right? There are lawyers lawyers and notarios who tell people that, but what they do to get people to get their quote unquote get their papers from having a sick kid is put them in deportation proceedings and throw themselves on the mercy of the immigration court. And sometimes the immigration court can grant relief for people that they feel sympathetic towards. But many times the person gets deported. There is no law that lets you apply for papers because you have a sick kid. So the more they can go before they pay anybody, before they think that paying somebody is a good option, they should go to one of the nonprofit centers and explain what they've been told and see if that's true.
So, Megan, I don't know if you might want to add to the do's and don'ts, but what would you say to people who would say, you know, there's so much time and energy and money and legal aid that's being put to the subject of immigration with people who may not be here legally. Should those same resources be put to other uses?
Oh. Well, I just wanted to add on Jenny's comment that in general, if you go to an attorney and they promise you something and it sounds too good to be true, then it probably isn't. And
Absolutely.
I guess that would go for all of us.
Right.
That's how you spot a scam.
Yes.
Good to true, probably not, and get a second opinion. You know, I think that your question about, you know, why spend all this time and energy on immigrants is, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. I mean, first of all, you could say we're a country of immigrants and we have certain values about openness and inclusiveness, and I think it's important for us to stick by those values, and that means protecting the rights of everyone who's in this country, whether they're first generation, second, third, fourth generation immigrant, as many of us are. I also think that it's ignoring the fact that many people who have been here for a very long time and have contributed to the society in a lot of different ways, paid taxes, who have been working hard and are active members in their communities, and to hold something like the lack of a green card or the lack of citizenship as the determination between whether or not someone should have rights that are protected is problematic, in my opinion.
I would also say that many of the legal resources that we're giving to these folks are helping people get what everybody else already has. I mean, the law has decided, for example, that if you're an abused and neglected child abandoned in the United States, that we want to help you. And that's the law. That's what the law has decided. But a 14-year-old here who has no parents is not going to be able to access that law without help. And the other 14-year-olds who were born here don't need that help because they don't need to, apply for something in order to be able to go to school or be able to continue safe here.
So I would just like to comment on what you said, that the efforts towards immigrants is to give them what everybody else has. And there are those in society who would say, no, we don't have that. There are lots of people who do not have freedom from domestic abuse, so to speak, or the ability not to be homeless. There are just so many other rights, a right to health care, that are denied a lot of other people in this community. So what would you say? I mean, these are resources that could be used for everybody in society, not just the immigrants.
I mean,
the need is so great, is it?
I think the need is great, but I don't think it's if you give legal help to immigrants, you're taking away from the restraining order project that helps victims of domestic violence. You can have both things, right? And they're not, the resources do not have to be that finite. Our society can step forward and recognize that it's a priority for us that people have a level playing field, that they all have a fair chance, that every child that's here gets to go to school, and every person here who's ill gets to have health care, and women and children and other people are free from violence. And that's what we want to do as a society. And we don't have to say, well, if we give it to this person, we're taking it away from this person, because that's not how the system is, right?
There are those who think that way.
I think that's a mistake.
There are those in the Midwest who feel, they are unemployed and they don't have jobs, and the jobs have been taken away. Plants that were going to be built in Mexico would be taking away their jobs.
I think that's a mistake, right? I think that's a real, viewing things from a zero-sum kind of perspective that unfortunately the campaign perpetuated. And that's one of the saddest things about the campaign, that it actually promoted division between people rather than giving people the true sense that we benefit when we give a person a DACA card and they start a business and they hire our teenage son. That's something that benefits us all. And we're not taking jobs away from person X by giving person Y a chance to work too. We as a whole economy grow from having people having the ability to work and go to school and do those kinds of things.
Megan, would you agree with that? There are those who would think that the immigrants, many of them are maybe undercutting people who are citizens, maybe by working for less money, which would be an end loss for some jobs. So how would you answer that?
Well, I think that you have to look at I'll just say this. I think that the movement, or the people that voted for Trump, many of them did it because, not all of them, but a lot of people who voted for Trump did it because they feel desperate economically and they feel like they don't have enough resources to survive or lead a decent life. And I sympathize with that, and I think it's, the economy is not lifting everyone up equally in our society, but that's an issue. There's no reason why it shouldn't. And the reason why it doesn't is because of our larger economic policies not because we have immigrants in this country who can't work legally. I think that's sort of like fighting other people at the bottom of the economic ladder in order to try to get to the top.
Now, you talked about our larger economic policies. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Well, I'm not an economist, but I guess I feel like, the reason why corporations have gone abroad, or why we don't have health care for everyone, has a lot to do with, federal legislation and the budget. It's not about finite resources. We're the wealthiest country in the world. We could pay for that if that was a priority. So saying that we shouldn't be giving legal status or help to immigrants in this country because there's not enough resources is just not true. There are plenty of resources. It's just a matter of the federal government not wanting to spend them on things like healthcare or housing, and that's why there's not,
Well, there are those who say that the federal government has been interfering too much as it is. And so would it be a matter of the federal government choosing to spend on housing, as you mentioned, some areas that might be left to the states or to the private sector? Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, Megan, so I'll turn to Jenny to see.
Oh, Megan went to the economy. I don't want to go to the economy. I'm just a legal aid lawyer.
Yes, but there are those questions that do come up.
But I think that when you portray this to people as if those people get money or get resources, then you lose, and the reason you don't have a job is because he came from Guatemala. That's something that people do to cause the fighting to be between all the people who are have-nots and distract them from what's really going on and what really can make a difference. It's not true that that people who are undocumented are really in fact taking a bunch of jobs from citizens, because the jobs that most of the undocumented folks who really don't have any papers have are not jobs that the people who are voting for Trump and who are feeling squeezed economically want, right? They don't want to be gardeners, and they don't want to be house cleaners, and they don't want to be off again, on again construction workers, which is what the undocumented folks primarily do. So it's not true that they're stealing jobs from American citizens. And it's not true that the reason that Ford closed their plant is because we had people coming here from Mexico. That is just a total disconnect. It's putting two things together that don't follow from each other, right?
So you said those arguments distract us from what's really going on. So what's really going on?
Well, what's really going on is we have a system that doesn't always provide education or help people get education to be able to have the jobs. And we're having a shifting economy where, there's more and more technology that's able to do things that people did before, and people need help to retool to find a different option for jobs. There is a greater and greater spread economically where there are some people who have way, way, way a lot, and some people who have way a little. And it's not so much that people are all worse off as that the spread has gotten so big that there's people looking at, say, Trump and saying he has all this, why don't I have that, right? But it's not about it's not immigration that has caused people in the Midwest to suffer economically.
Megan, would you agree with Jenny, who said putting the emphasis on immigration might be distracting people from what's really going on?
I think it's.
And if that's the case, what would you say is really going on?
Uh-oh, if you agree with me, you got to answer that question. Agree with me anyway, right?
And if you don't agree with her, still, what do you think is really going on?
Well, I think if you look at what Trump's policies, what he wants to put into effect, I think it's very enlightening. I mean, one of his top priorities is tax cuts. But if you actually look, and maybe this has changed in the past few weeks, but the last time that I looked at what his tax cut plans are, for most middle and lower class people, their taxes are going to stay the same or go slightly up. And the tax cuts for people in the top percentages will go way down. And, repealing the health care law is going to remove health care subsidies and cause millions of people to lose health care coverage. So, focusing on immigrants is easy to distract people from those other things that are going to start hurting a lot.
So it seems to me if the two of you are correct in your assessments.
Well, if Jenny and I were in charge, it would be a totally different story.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's true.
I'm laughing, but would you repeat that? I want to make sure I.
She said if Jenny and I were in charge, it would be a different situation.
Oh, I am sure. So it seems to me if your assessment is correct, then along the lines as some of Trump's policies are implemented, we will see more and more people get left off when it comes to health care. We will see more and more people being hurt by the tax reforms that are being talked about. So some of these things will come out naturally, you think?
It depends what people put together, right? It's hard for me to see how people thought it was okay that Trump didn't pay taxes or wouldn't reveal his taxes. Like, why does somebody who is, struggling, making minimum wage, frustrated with having to pay taxes, want to vote for somebody who everybody knows is getting a tax break that is not deserved, right? I don't understand that.
They would say the fact that he could take advantage of American tax law is a good thing, and it shows how smart he is. And so maybe the laws need to be changed where more and more people can take advantage of those tax laws like he did.
The money that people pay in taxes pays for things that we want to have. We want to have our roads. We want to have our public schools. We do want to have health care. And not having health care doesn't only hurt the people who can't afford health care, it hurts everybody else who gets sick from people who are not.
No, that's assumption that his policies with the repeal of the Affordable Care Act will result in people not having health care. Although I heard that plans to extend young people staying on their parents' health care plan were voted down. Having pre-existing conditions protecting people, those protections were voted down. So should we assume that what's being proposed thus far, which hasn't been concrete, but just the repeal, will in fact knock people off, prevent them from having adequate health care?
It absolutely will. I mean, there are people who don't have health insurance, are afraid to go to the doctor, and they wait till they have no option, and then they go to the emergency room. And that's a very expensive way to give somebody health care because they're not getting preventative care, they're not getting care early on, so they're way more sick or way more contagious for a longer amount of time. And it's absolutely better to make sure that people get primary care, and they don't do that unless they have insurance because they're afraid of the bill.
Megan, you're still with us.
I know, I'm having so much fun.
That's great. I'm having fun. So, would you like to comment on what you've heard thus far about if your assessment is correct? There are certain things that we will naturally see in our society where more people are being denied health care, and tax reforms will help only a few people. So.
Well, I mean, I guess historically, when the economy crashes, people vote Democrat, and when the economy is doing well, they vote Republican. So there may be some truth to that, but you also have to count on the media to let people know about it and do invest. That may be a big assumption, and I think what Jenny said is people may not connect the dots in the same way.
So are you blaming the media or?
No, I'm not blaming anyone. I think that those things might happen and facts happen and people interpret them in different ways. So I don't know. I would think if that happened to me, that's how I would interpret it, but I don't know.
Oh, you're right. I'm reminded of the fact, especially in this election, people believe the things that they wanted to believe.
Yes.
And so those things very well could happen, but there would be another interpretation or another spin put on it.
Right.
However, this will be a Trump administration, and the Republicans control the House, they control the Senate, and they control the presidency. So what spin can be put on the, if...
Well, it does tend to go back and forth. There tends to be, you know, one year it's the Democrats, and the next it goes back because people's hopes are dashed, or people think that they want something different because it didn't what they hoped out of it. First of all, change doesn't happen as much as people expect, and then people are always disappointed and they switch, you know. But I think it goes back to also what we said earlier about if it sounds too good to be true, it probably isn't. And I think there's oftentimes a sale job by politicians that, you know, you can pay less taxes and they'll be, you know, trickle down and people will do better, and it just will happen that way, and you won't have to do any hard work about that. We can cut all this and it'll be better, right? And people want to believe that story, so they vote for that story, but it isn't a story that really holds water.
Sure. I was hearing today before the show that there is a book called The Trump Survival Guide.
Ouch.
So, Megan, what do you think we can look forward to, given the possible scenarios? What would you say? Where should the focus be, if there is any particular focus? What should the strategy be, or what about the planning in general? Any words of wisdom?
I think what I'm looking forward to is seeing how many people and organizations are coming together over this and making common cause to fight for people's rights. And, you know, when we have a unified goal and we can agree on so many things compared to what the new administration is planning to bring on, I think there's a lot of power there. So I'm excited to see all the organizing that's going to be happening.
Sure. And you think this is something that's going to continue? It's not maybe a flash in the pan generated by instant fears or present fears?
No, I think people recognize, I guess if Trump doesn't do any of the things that he says he's going to do, then maybe people won't keep organizing and fighting back. But I think that people recognize everything that's at stake, and it's important to work for those, to preserve those things that people have fought for to get already. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of activism and...
Now, it just occurs to me, you were saying if Trump doesn't do all the things he says he'll do, that there might not be that activism. However, I'm thinking, on the other hand, if Trump doesn't do all the things he said he might do, his supporters might get involved and become more active. Like, where is the wall, and where is the health reform, and
That's true.
where are the deportations? Make it.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
Well,
Any comments?
I think he has stepped back from some of the things he said. I mean, I think he's a person who likes to make a splash, and I think I don't know. There was some the Grinch who stole Christmas, and it was the Trump who stole election. And at the end, they said, well, but now he's in trouble because he actually got the job, right? And I think that I hope that in actually getting the job, he'll realize, for example, how devastating it would be to repeal DACA, how that will have bad economic consequences for the whole nation.
Yes, but wait a moment. His supporters, and maybe the Attorney General whom he is recommending, might not think these things are devastating. So is it a matter of opinion, what's devastating and what's not devastating, and to whom?
Well, that's totally a valid point. I think even some of the conservative economic groups have put some numbers on what getting rid of DACA would do. And it does affect not just the people, the kids who applied for DACA, or even their families. They have generated jobs for other people. It would be very expensive to go and deport all of these people. And that would have a bad effect on their businesses who've hired these people and trained these people. And there's, numbers on how much they would lose and having to find somebody else and start over. It's not a thing that just we're a community and they're part of the community, and it doesn't help the community to take away some of the productive members of it.
Megan,
Yes.
are you still there having fun?
Get her a tough question. I think she's going to hang.
What was the question again? Sorry.
Did you hear Jenny?
Yes, I was listening to her response about whether or not Trump is going to actually do some of these things.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think that he will do some of the things that he's promised, at least on the immigration side. And yeah, I think that we can probably will see expanded use of immigration prisons, and we can probably see expanded deportations without hearings. In terms of DACA, I don't really know what he'll do. Maybe the Congress has introduced different bills to try and save it or provide protection to that group, with including greater penalties for other immigrant groups. So maybe that will be a way for him to keep it and save face.
So if some of those plans some of the scenario that you just now presented comes to pass, what can be done, given the composition of the Senate, where the power is with the House, with the administration itself? It's an uphill battle, I would think. And to whom would you be able to appeal? Or you could say the Supreme Court, but that might be changing too.
Well, one thing I think is that the California legislature and the state of California has come forward as very committed to helping the people who live in California. And that's been really wonderful to see how many of the California politicians have said, we're going to do what we can to keep people safe in California.
Megan, you were going to say something.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think that the states can make a huge impact here in protecting populations in immigration and in other areas. And California is a great example of all the different things that you can do to try and protect immigrants. And also even locally, there are things that can be done. So it is a difficult battle, but it's certainly not a pre-decided one.
Sure. Now, you mentioned the states. I think I heard you say that. How are the states stacking up? I mean, California and perhaps New York and the states along the East Coast might be more favorable to immigrants than maybe some of the southern states or other states like Arizona. So it varies state by state, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. I mean, but in some ways, organizing at the state level and getting people elected at the state level might be an easier push than the federal level.
Sure. Now, it's my understanding that there are, when you look at our legal system, a lot of positions in the legal system that are vacant, that the Trump administration can fill with conservative attorneys across the board, right?
Yes.
Yes, that's true.
So that will have an enormous impact on the legal system in general.
What's interesting is I'm counsel in a case right now that it's a class action against Customs and Border Patrol regarding the conditions that they hold people after arresting them near the border in the state of Arizona. It's a federal lawsuit, but it's limited to people who are arrested and held in Border Patrol facilities in Arizona. And Arizona is a conservative state, and we have a judge who's a Republican nominee, and he recently, after the election, ruled in our favor, granting a preliminary injunction ordering Border Patrol to improve the conditions that they hold people. So, just because someone is a conservative judge doesn't mean they're going to have no respect for the Constitution and our laws, and that we can't win legal cases with them.
So, of course, now a lot depends on that interpretation of the Constitution. Whether it's something that's elastic or whether it's the interpretation is something that's fixed. Do you see it as a changing, a growing document, or do you see it as something that was fixed when it was done?
It has to be a growing document, because there's no way you can say that they contemplated the internet freedom when they wrote the Constitution, right? I mean, our world has changed, and therefore the document has to accommodate that.
But there's no longer a militia, an armed militia, however it's being interpreted.
Right.
As people have the right to bear arms as an armed militia.
I have a relative who feels very strongly about that on the pro-gun side. But no, I mean, it definitely does not. It is a document that contains values, and you have to. There is no way to not be engaging interpretation to apply that to new situations.
According to your way of thinking.
I'm
sure there are some conservative judges, maybe Scalia, who saw it as something that was more fixed. So we might have a Supreme Court justice who might agree with him. Megan?
Even Scalia had decisions adapting the Fourth Amendment to new technology and recognizing that if you're going to have that right in anything, you have to take into account some of those new things, even him. So I just don't think that having Democrat-nominated judges might be favorable, but that doesn't mean that we've totally lost the court system.
So what you're saying is we mustn't make judgments
no
on the
pun intended,
basis
right.
of someone's political stripe. It doesn't necessarily follow.
Right. I mean, we've made a lot of effort in our Constitution, in fact, to make the judiciary independent from the executive branch. I mean, that's the whole premise, and that's still there. And so just because somebody's nominated by a Republican doesn't mean that they're going to not see in the individual case, which is what they're judging.
That's what we would
they're
hope.
Way clear.
That's what we would hope. Now, let's talk about some of the appointments. Yes, like the Attorney General and the impact that might have, and what you think about that appointment, or for the Secretary of State. Where would you like to start? Megan or Jenny?
Well, I have a lot of concerns about the appointments. It's hard to watch, but and there are definitely. It's important to speak out and to communicate, and I get the send a Twitter call and all that, and I think those are important things to have input into the process. At least, even if it doesn't mean that somebody doesn't get confirmed, it at least sends a message that we do care about those things. So.
No, you said you have concerns specifically.
Well, I think certainly immigration, but also LGBT rights and Planned Parenthood and freedom of choice, and healthcare are all things that are, and the Violence Against Women Act are all things that are up for grabs and important to keep from having drastic changes to.
Sure, Megan. I hope you heard. Did you hear?
Yeah.
Do you have concerns, or?
I have concerns about, all of the nominees nominees probably are people that are concerning to me, and it's hard to say what happens. And I guess in some cases, maybe the best we can hope for that agency is that bureaucracy will stymie anything getting done.
That
bureaucracy will slow anything from being changed. And that is true, right?
Well, that's what the complaint has been from the other side, that
Absolutely.
things are so big and government is so overgrown that you don't really get anything done.
Right, well, it's a big boat, and it doesn't turn easily.
And so you don't think, with the promises for change, along the lines that we've talked about, that boat will turn quickly enough that there will be some deep changes being made within the system?
I think the boat will not turn as much as people fear, right? I think that...
Or some people hope.
Or some people hope. Well, I mean, in watching my daughter's reaction to the election and how much they felt frightened, you know, for their future and the future of other girls. And you know, the main thing I could say to them is, look, we've seen things go back and forth, and different people get elected and not get elected, and it doesn't change. One of the things about our system is, you know, you can say, oh, bureaucracy, it's, you know, resistance, and that's terrible, you know, no one gets anything done. But it also has a certain amount of protection, right? That we don't go swinging wildly back and forth.
We hope not.
As much as we fear, right? As much as it seems like.
So you're saying this too shall pass.
A little
eventually.
bit. Yes.
But 4 years might be a long time.
4 years,
or a lot
or 2
of
years.
things done.
Some things could change in 2 years in terms of Congress, but yes, I agree.
Okay, Megan, your final words?
Well, I think that, you know, people need to be active. They can't sit this one out. None of us can afford to do that. We have to be calling our representatives. We have to be out there marching and taking actions to make sure that, you know, all of these promises don't happen. We can't just rely on, you know, our government's inability to get things done, because if people aren't paying attention, then it just might happen. And so, you know, I think I'm really hopeful, because I think people are very motivated and they're getting organized and getting out there. But it's certainly necessary for everyone to be involved at this point.
And I absolutely agree with that. I didn't at all mean to say we don't need to worry about it because the government's too slow.
I don't think we got that message either, but there might be some consolation. Well, we've come to the end of the show, and thank you so much, Megan, for hanging with us.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for being here, and I really want to thank the two of you for a most invigorating discussion, and thanks for sharing your ideas. I'd like to thank our viewers for watching. Until next time.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.